Well, it's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon and to see what a great crowd we have here in the cross-section of our great movement. A few things I'd like to share with you today. Basically, I'd like to give you an update on three areas. Brief recap of where we were this time last year, what's been achieved over the past 12 months, and some key highlights when we look at the year ahead. And then after I give you that update and sharing of some of the key points, we're then going to have a panel forum, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So this time last year at the AGM, I had probably four key points that I spoke about. The first one was I talked about who we are and what we stand for, and I was emphasising the fact that we are churches of Christ, that our identity, our purpose, our reason for existence was that we are churches of Christ, and deliberately emphasising of Christ. What we stand for is restoring the heart of Christ's teaching as it was recorded in the New Testament. We describe ourselves historically as a restoration movement, and some of those terms get bandied around as though people don't think about what they mean. The same as Churches of Christ. People say it quickly as though it's a label. It actually means something. We are churches of Christ. We are part of a great restoration movement. We're part of a Protestant movement, protesting against some of the practices that had deviated away from the heart of Christ's teaching. And the restoration movement is about, our heritage is about restoring it. So we talk about uncluttered Christianity. We talk about not having robes, not having titles, about being the priesthood of all believers. Those of you that have been associated with Churches of Christ for many years know this well, because it's what we stand for, and we still stand for it. And I believe in it passionately, that it is so relevant. What our communities today need is restoration of those old values, if you like, that are still current. So I spoke about that last year. I'm highlighting it again because it is the heart of who we are. I talked about three things: the Great Commission, the Great Commandment, and the Golden Rule, if you like. The three things of Christ's teaching. The Great Commission: go out into all the world and make disciples. Or if you read the Message translation, go out into all the world and train others in the way of life that I have shown you, Jesus said. And what was the way of life? It was about justice, mercy, compassion, love. Train others in the way of life. So love God with all you've got, your heart, strength, mind, soul. Love one another. Love your neighbour as yourself. Go out and tell other people and train other people. It's the heart of who we are. The second broad area I talked about last year was the damage of silos, and I was using the metaphor of silos. And I talked about the fragmentation that we had experienced, and we're on the way to healing. And I'll update you briefly in a moment about some of the further progress on that. But I talked about the work that the council had done and the board, and certainly all of the senior management team, in working to rebuild bridges, to re-heal those fractures that had occurred. The fragmentation that had happened over the past decades, and the price that we had paid for this. The price that we have paid of being fiercely independent churches. I think there's a great strength in our heritage is in having autonomous churches, but autonomous never meant fiercely independent and we're not going to have anything to do with the care facility down the road or the church in the next community or the op shop that belongs to somebody else. It never meant that. And unfortunately in many areas we had over several decades drifted into that. And a lot of people got to the point of saying enough. When we talk about restoring the heart of the New Testament, that's anything but when we live in that world. And I talked about two stories. And I talked about the old story of being 70 fiercely independent churches, and we do some other things like care services, and a news story, which is just as true, of being 200 plus kingdom access points or Christian presences that we have in communities around Queensland. About being one body, the body of Christ, with one mission to work together to bring the light of Christ into communities. We were once a proud movement. When I go back, and I'm old enough to remember as a boy back deep in the last millennium almost now, but we described ourselves as a brotherhood, which we don't use that term anymore, and quite correctly because it's a patriarchal term. But the great essence of that was this sense of being part of a whole, being part of a tribe, being part of a wider family. And I think we need to reclaim the heart of that. And that is actually the heart of the church, and we read about it in Acts, the heart of the New Testament. We were once a proud movement. We are becoming again that. I talked about the default future, that if we kept on the path we're on. I talked about fragmentation and loss of identity. I talked about churches dropping the term Churches of Christ. And I also talked about that I understand that if we don't have pride in what that means, then we try and find other labels, other ways of describing it. But I talked about, I just think that was the wrong path of going on. We are Churches of Christ. Churches of Christ. What better name could you choose to say who we are and what our heritage is? So I talked about let's recognise and be collectively who we are. And I talked about the default future if we kept on that path of fragmentation, fiercely independent, everyone in their foxholes just worrying about their own little neck in the woods, is a slow spiralling death. The good news is that that's been reversed by the work of the council, by many people that are in this room, and the heart of getting to a point where we don't want to do that anymore. So I talked about moving forward the goal of clusters. I talked about the work that the council had begun, that the board had picked up and was running with, and that the senior management team, senior staff, had set about regrouping, refocusing, rebuilding, so that we might once more be a force in bringing the gospel of Christ into every community that we have a presence in. And I outlined goals of rebuilding bridges between different parts of the organisation, working together in clusters, assisted by mission consultants, which we've now named Mission Action Partners, which are in essence, in the old days we would have called them evangelists. Evangelists is an old term. Still absolutely accurate, still has the absolute heart, and it still is about getting out there, telling the message, preaching the gospel. And we're calling them Mission Action Partners to bring the light of Christ into communities. So what's been achieved over the past 12 months? The floods were mentioned briefly. The floods were an absolute testing time, and it was towards the end of December right through January. Many people in the room, probably every single one of us was touched in one way, if not directly. Certainly we had family, friends, people that we knew that were severely tested. Lives were lost. I know in Toowoomba, Dale Renner and Dale White and the team, conducted a number of funerals, and that was played out. Terrible time. But the silver lining and the blessing that often paradoxically occurs with suffering is that it brought forth stuff that wasn't evident. It brought forth a call, and it was almost like God speaking to us directly. Okay, you've spoken about you want to work together as one body. Well, let's see if you can do it. And indeed we did. Not only with ourselves, the care services and local churches and local communities, but everyone in local communities banding together. Pictures that were in the papers, they went around the country, they went internationally. In the role I was getting emails from the United States, from our brothers and sisters in Churches of Christ, Disciples of Christ in the United States, donating money, donating anything that they could do to help from New Zealand. Had that strong sense again of being part of a wide family. So the floods, I think, were a major achievement. We saw things, our Director of Care, David Swain, initiated this, and it's such an obvious thing when I say it now, but at the time it was reflective of where we were in the old story and the new. David highlighted the fact that we have residential aged cares that have industrial laundries. They have industrial kitchens because we're washing a whole lot of washing for a lot of people. We're preparing meals for a whole lot of people. Why couldn't they, in such circumstances, take and do laundry for community in dire need, or prepare meals for people in dire needs? Obvious when you say it, but it was like, oh, this is a revelation. It's thinking outside the box. It's about bringing the light of Christ into the community. And there were hundreds and hundreds of examples that rose up. You know, many of the churches here, Westside Church of Christ, Jim and Cheryl and others that are there, enormous work. Darryl at Whitehill is another one with enormous work right through that West Ipswich area, let alone others in here. Absolutely tangible. And as I said, the paradox of great suffering and yet opportunity to bring light and connect to the community. The second thing that I think was emerging was continued improvement in our communication. Desley and her team have just done an amazing amount of work with networking, monthly networking, going out to all the churches. I continually get feedback about that as a major instrument, if you like, of trying to promote news. And let me take the sort of sidebar to say, if you've got good news stories or news, please send them in, because it's a really important part of building this collective sense of identity. So send them in. The team there just loves it. So we've had the monthly networking, which in itself is a really big job to put out, but they do it every month. All of our websites have been revamped to make them much cleaner, make all of the information up to date. Resources, online resources have been significantly enhanced for our churches and for our staff out in our system. Visits and contacts to our churches and our care services have significantly increased. It's been an absolute, very intentional program of trying to get out and connect with our people. It's an old thing, but we all need reminding about it. It's all about relationships. It's all about relationships. You know, we do so much stuff at times that avoids or doesn't go and actually talk with people and build relationships. So much of life goes easier when we do that.